Some of her sweet tea. Y'all didn't know I could sing, did you?
Please, show us more.
Show you more? I'm pretty
Yeah.
shy. All right, I'm going to give, about how many are we missing?
2 or so.
All right. I could show you a great 80s song,
Please do.
but I know the video's clean too, unlike the Panama one, but I mean, great song, but the video had some inappropriate pictures. I won't subject you to Mr. Although it's good stuff. We're missing, you say 2 or 3?
Yeah. They're back now.
Okay, very good. So Monday we talked about inside lobbying. Today let's talk about outside lobbying. Inside lobbying can best be described as the lobbyists are inside Washington, D.C. And they are directly contacting and accessing our congressmen and those in the presidential cabinet, and even trying to petition the Supreme Court. So you'll hear this term sometimes to describe Washington, D.C., stuff that happens inside the Beltway. The Beltway is simply kind of like Fort Smith. You have 540 that kind of goes around it and connects to 40. So the Beltway in D.C. is basically just an interstate that circles the Capitol. So the inside lobbyists are going to be inside the Beltway, and the outside lobbying is going to be done outside of it. And it's going to include things like grassroots lobbying, which we'll talk about here in a moment. It's basically pressure coming from outside of the gateway, of the Beltway. Probably the 2 primary ways that outside lobbying works is involvement in election campaigns, and the one thing that makes the world go around again, money. So let's talk about outside lobbying. And what I did is I just added these slides to Mondays, so I'll put these new ones up. Here's a picture that represents it. Lobbyists are on the inside. Outside lobbying engages more of the voters, so they're on the outside. And so we talked about, well, I mentioned grassroots lobbying. And this is simply where an interest group will encourage the public to write letters to your congressman, make phone calls. Nowadays, you can send emails to them, but this is getting the general populace to exert outside pressure concerning an issue that's very important to them. Another way that lobby groups, interest groups, try to get the public involved in lobbying is through public demonstrations or through protests. And the idea here is to protest or demonstrate and get the media's attention and get some news coverage and bring to light the issue that you are hoping will stir the senators, get their attention, and get them, just be a catalyst to get them to speed up their support for an issue. We have seen, if you watch any kind of world news, there's been a really good example of this on a global level, where environmentalists are using this 16-year-old girl from Sweden, I believe. Her name is Greta Thunberg. And they're kind of using her as a poster child for going green and saving the environment. And they had her. The environmentalists had her, I think she was on Good Morning America the other day, as well as other news outlets. And then she gave a speech at the United Nations the other day. So they are really using her in her protests because she's very, very, very green, which is a term for very, very environmentally minded. And they're using her to put pressure on politicians on the world stage. There was this really humorous news clip of her the other day after she gave her speech, standing between these big bodyguards, and President Trump comes in and he's getting all the attention and she's just glaring at him. But anyway, that is a public protest on the global level. Then many interest groups will have local chapters on the state level or maybe in regions. And so the local chapters will try to stir up interest locally or in the area. Or also sometimes local chapters will try to recruit local people who are influential people, or maybe people who are somewhat famous at that level, and try to get them to influence politicians. For example, on the state level, a couple of years ago, when Mary Fallon was running for governor, and the first time she ran against a woman named Jerry Askins, and Barry Switzer, a former football coach of the University of Oklahoma, was basically campaigning for Jerry Askins. So he's someone that would really have a lot of influence in Oklahoma, being a former Sooner football coach and a very successful one. So the most, this is something you might need to know for the test. The largest, or I'm sorry, the most effective interest group that gets their people to write letters or make phone calls is the AARP, which is basically a interest group for retired people. And so Congress will get more letters and calls from members of AARP than any other interest group. Usually because, you know, they're talking about cutting Medicare or getting rid of private insurance or getting rid of Medicaid and making your prescriptions go higher. And AARP, they jump into action when that happens and get their people mobilized. Another way that interest groups can apply pressure is by what's called coalition building. And this is where similar interest groups will join together on an issue. For example, you could have a coalition of the National Organization for Women with the League of Women Voters and with the NARAL Pro-Choice America, and they could all come together and form a coalition to try to influence leaders on women's issues. So coalitions are another way of outside lobbying, another way for outside lobbying to be done. Now, a part of grassroots lobbying is to influence how senators will vote on an issue. So if a senator is kind of flip-flopping on an issue, or they're kind of wishy-washy, for example, gun control, and let's say it's a Republican senator who is for the Second Amendment, but they feel like maybe there should be stricter gun control on automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons. And the NRA could say, look, if you vote for stricter gun control, we're going to withhold financial contributions. We're going to campaign against you. And so outside lobbying pressure can come from, or come during the election process, during voting time. And the NRA would not just have their inside lobbyists pressuring that senator, but they would make sure the NRA chapter in that senator's state would try to encourage their members to write or call that senator. Any question on the grassroots lobbying? So the other main way that outside lobbying has major influence is through money. And there's two groups that we want to be familiar with. We want to know these for the test. There are what's called PACs, or political action committees. And these are simply ways that interest groups can financially support political candidates. But there is a limit for these PACs. For example, they cannot, let's use a union like the United Steelworkers. And to be a member of that union, you have to pay dues. Well, the United Steelworkers Union cannot give money to a candidate that comes from the membership dues. The only money they can give is voluntary contributions from their members. So if you're a member of the United Steelworkers in 2020 and you pay your dues in January, but then the United Steelworkers, they're really supporting whoever the Democratic nominee is. Let's say it's Joe Biden. We don't know for sure, but they would say, let's support Joe. You can give a voluntary gift that will be funneled through our political action committee and go to Joe. So it's a voluntary giving. But here is another thing that you need to know about PACs. They can support as many candidates as they want. So the United Steelworkers, they could support on the national level, they could support Joe Biden. Then they could support they could support all of the senators in all of the states that would be friendly to them. So there is no limit to how many candidates they can support, but there is a limit to how much money they can give them. They can only give $5,000 to each candidate. And then they can do that for each election. So Joe Biden is running against all these other Democrats in the primary. They can give him $5,000 then. Joe Biden gets the Democratic nominee, and so he's running against Trump in the general election. They can then give him another $5,000 for the general election. So the limit is really $10,000 a candidate, but it's even broken down into smaller units of $5,000 per election. And then, well, here's an example that will illustrate something your textbook says. The pro-business PACs will tend to support Republicans, and then your unions will support Democrats. And so here, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 10 PACs here. 9 of them are businesses, and you can see that they are all over 50% in more support of Republicans. And then there's one union, and 98% of their money goes to Democrats. So Republicans tend to get the business PACs, and Democrats tend to get the unions and social issues PACs. Now, in the last 10 years or so, there's been a new term added to our American government dictionary, and that is the term of super PACs. Super PACs are simply another name for an independent expenditure only committee, which simply means this. These are committees that can be put together, and they can spend as much money as they want. See, the super PAC they're holding is money, unlimited political cash. They can spend as much money as they want on an election as long as they do not directly work with the candidate or a political party. So, for example, let's stick with a highly conservative political group, the NRA. They put together a super PAC. Now, they're doing this totally on their own accord. They cannot do it with the Republican Party. They cannot consult with Donald Trump. There is an indirect relationship with the candidate and with the party. But if they want to run ads on TV, if they want to make phone calls, if they want to send out mailings to every household in America, they can raise as much money as they want to. They can even make a commercial about Trump as long as they put at the bottom, this ad not sponsored by the Trump campaign committee, to something to that effect. So super PACs have unlimited funds. Also, they do not have to report their expenses until 2 years after they're formed. So let's say this coming January, there's a new super PAC form. Let's say it's a new super PAC for abortion. They will not have to report any of their expenses until January of 2022. By that time, the election is over. And so there's really, in a sense, there's no regulations. The only thing is they cannot consult directly with a candidate or a political party. So there's been debate about super PACs. Are they really ethical? And many people are saying, no, they're not ethical. They are basically buying elections, buying candidates, because they have unlimited money. Because see, they can get the money and they could give it to the candidate as long as they didn't consult with the candidate. This cartoon kind of sums it up. Made from 100% Fox-free speech. Basically, one of the arguments is super PACs are hurting free speech because this giant organization with all kinds of money is basically silencing the voters who do not have that kind of money. And then it says it holds all my political influence plus the politicians I bought and paid for. So there are continuing debates about super PACs. Bernie Sanders is a major critic because he believes that the interests of a few super wealthy are totally drowning out the voice of the smaller average citizen. But again, money is what makes the world go round. Any questions on that? All right, well, that's all I have to say about that. To quote that great American Forrest Gump. One final thing, and then we'll be done early again, if that's okay with everybody. No, you want the full time? Okay, okay. Just seeing if you're awake. Now, back in chapter 1, we read and talked about the United States is basically a pluralist democracy, which simply means that all kinds of citizens, religions, businesses, organizations can have influence on our government. A pluralistic democracy. And it means that someone who has all the money cannot control the government. Our First Amendment says that one religion cannot control how people worship. So we're not a majoritarian democracy. We're a pluralistic democracy. And interest groups are basically a reflection of that, because many citizens who would not be involved in politics or the political process on an individual basis, they can get involved by joining a group. Or if they work in a factory, they can join a union, and that union represents them. So interest groups really do help more of the public interest be served. But there is an imbalance, so to speak, because economic interest groups still, they're still more economic interest groups than any other. And they usually represent big businesses or corporations, and so they have more money. So while it's not perfect, we still have a pluralistic democracy where probably more people than in any other country can be represented by their government. There still is a small bit of imbalance. And one textbook one older textbook made a good analogy about what the government is to do. The government really is, now we would not agree with this part, the government is passive, but when it comes to passing policy, the government really acts like a referee between competing interest groups. All kinds of groups are jockeying to get their legislation passed or to get federal funds, right? To get their piece of the pie, so to speak. And so the government really is kind of just a referee in that sense. So we have leaders in our government that are still working to try to make sure that there's a good balance of power with all of these political groups and these PACs and now these super PACs. So public interests, if they are regulated correctly, are good for our citizenry because they help more people get represented by our government. So any questions on interest groups? So our test is not until next Friday, and we have gone through the chapter. So this Friday we'll do some review. Let me check something real quick. Let me see when the next quiz is coming up. I think I'm going to, yeah, I changed the next quiz to the same format where you'll have 3 days to do it at home. So that will be, that won't start until Monday. So we might take Monday off, but this Friday and next Wednesday we will definitely use to review and prepare for the test. So any questions?
No. I have one.
Yes.
But it's over the homework. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so on our blog entry, you want us to find, like, try and find the volunteer rate for LaPorte County.
Yeah.
Do you have a that we can go to for that? Because I literally can't find it.
Okay. Again, that's only if you can. So that is due by Wednesday. So you might try. I'm assuming you've tried it through the internet so far, right?
Yes. Mr. Bean, is it due Friday or is it due Wednesday?
Because today's Wednesday, but it's at the 27th.
No, all of your responses are due a week from today. Your initial response is due Friday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what you might try is you might try to call someone at the LaFleur County Courthouse and see if they have something.
Okay.
But if you can't, don't worry about it. Just try, just see if you can find anything before Friday. And if you can't, just let me know. I'll understand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yep. Corianne and Landry, your two are the last two tests for me to get graded. And I'm still trying to get those open. So I'm trying to do that. If you can get it open, take screenshots and send them to me. That would be great. But hopefully we'll have that done by Friday.
I've been trying to get my notes in and it still won't let me. I've tried everything.
Okay, is that Landry?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. I'll try look for some other programs.
Adios.
Okay, we'll see y'all Friday.
Fine.